The smell hit first, grease and char, thick enough to taste, threading through the crack beneath the kitchen door. Because sometimes the places we trust most hide the coldest truths. Route 47 carved through Nebraska farmland like a scar, and for 32 years, the Silver Spur Diner sat at mile marker 83, a chrome-sided relic that never locked its doors. Truckers knew it. Salesmen knew it. The graveyard shift nurses driving home from Mercy General knew it. Open 24 hours, 365 days a year, serving breakfast platters that arrived sizzling and perfect no matter the hour. The eggs never ran out. The bacon never burned. And the burgers, thick, hand-pressed patties that bled pink in the center, tasted better than anything you could buy in Lincoln or Omaha. Locals said Ray Torrance ran the tightest kitchen in 3 counties. He'd bought the place in 1961, a squat man with arms like firewood and a smile that never reached his eyes. He worked the grill himself, flipping patties with a rhythm that felt mechanical, almost hypnotic. His wife Evelyn handled the register and poured coffee that stayed hot long after it should have cooled. The diner became a landmark, the kind of place travelers marked on maps with pen circles and the word "stop" in capital letters. But in late January of 1993, a county health inspector named Marcus Webb walked through those glass doors and noticed something strange. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. And if stories like this keep you up at night, hit that like button and subscribe. You'll want to be here for what comes next. Webb had been doing inspections for 11 years. He knew the smell of spoiled meat, the greasy residue of neglected fryers, the faint sweetness of mold creeping through walk-in coolers. The Silver Spur passed every visual test. Stainless steel gleamed, floors shone, no grease buildup on the vents. But the air felt wrong, too warm, and the patrons sitting in the booths, hunched over their plates in the dead of winter, had something Webb couldn't quite name. Sunburn, not a little color. Deep, angry red across cheeks and forearms. The kind you earned after 6 hours on a lake in July. A woman near the window nursed a Coke, her nose peeling in white flakes. A trucker 2 booths down had blisters forming on the backs of his hands. Webb asked Evelyn if the diner had installed heat lamps. She smiled, polite, distant, and said they hadn't changed a thing in 30 years. Webb made a note. Then he asked to see the basement. Ray Torrance's expression didn't change, but his hand paused mid-flip, the spatula hovering above the grill. He said the basement was just storage, old freezers, canned goods. Nothing worth inspecting, Webb insisted. Protocol, he explained. Ray wiped his hands on his apron and led him to a door beside the men's restroom, a dull gray panel with no handle, just a deadbolt that required 2 keys. The stairs descended into darkness that swallowed Webb's flashlight beam. The air thickened, hot and wet, like stepping into a greenhouse. Sweat broke across his neck. At the bottom, his boots splashed into 2 inches of water. Warm water, almost body temperature, steaming faintly in the cold January air. The walls were bare concrete. No boiler, no water heater, no electrical panels. Just a single door at the far end, riveted steel with a wheel lock, the kind you'd find on a bank vault. Webb asked what was behind it. Ray said it was sealed off, structural damage, unsafe. Webb pressed his palm against the metal and jerked it back. The surface burned hot, hotter than any pipe or furnace. And beneath his hand, he felt it. A hum, low and steady, like a swarm of bees trapped inside the walls. He should have walked away, filed a report, called the county engineer. Instead, Webb stood in that flooded basement, staring at the door, and asked one question. "How long has that been down here?" Ray didn't answer. He turned and climbed the stairs, and when Webb followed, the diner was empty. Every patron gone, every plate cleared. Evelyn stood behind the register, hands folded, eyes flat as coins. Webb left without another word. 3 weeks later, the Spring River overflowed its banks and the Silver Spur's basement flooded completely. When the fire department arrived to pump it out, the water was boiling. But the real discovery came when they broke through the vault door and found the chamber beneath. What was inside that lead-lined room? And why did every search team that entered come back with fewer answers than questions? The fire chief stood at the top of the stairs, radio crackling static, refusing to go back down. Because some doors were locked for reasons that had nothing to do with safety. Deputy Fire Marshal Linda Garrett arrived at the Silver Spur on February 19, 1993, expecting a routine drainage job, flooded basement, maybe a burst pipe, paperwork by noon. Instead, she found 3 firefighters sitting on the curb outside, faces pale, one of them vomiting into the storm drain. The youngest, a rookie named Derek Moss, kept repeating the same phrase. "It shouldn't be warm. It shouldn't be warm." Garrett descended the stairs with a halogen work light and a thermal camera. The floodwater had receded to ankle depth, but the air still shimmered with heat. Her boots squelched against concrete as she swept the beam across the basement. Empty shelving units, a rusted handcart, cardboard boxes swollen and split from moisture. Then the light found the vault door. Someone had cut through the wheel lock with an acetylene torch, leaving the steel peeled back like a tin can. Beyond it, darkness. And that sound, the hum Webb had described, louder now, a vibration that climbed through her bones and settled behind her teeth. She stepped through. The chamber was 12 feet, square, walls lined with dull gray panels that her Geiger counter later identified as lead sheeting, 3 inches thick. The floor sloped toward a central drain, stained rust brown in concentric rings. Overhead, a grid of metal hooks hung from the ceiling on chains, 27 in total, each one crusted with something dark and organic. No lights, no ventilation. Just the hum, emanating from a rectangular object in the corner, a box roughly the size of a commercial freezer, smooth and seamless, with no visible seams, handles, or control panels. Garrett reached out to touch it. Her hand stopped 6 inches away. The air above the box rippled with heat distortion, and her thermal camera spiked red, registering 212 degrees Fahrenheit, the boiling point of water. She backed away, took 3 photographs with her department-issue Polaroid, and climbed the stairs. When she emerged, Ray Torrance was standing beside his truck, engine running, Evelyn in the passenger seat. Garrett called out to him. He didn't turn. The truck pulled onto Route 47 and disappeared west, and neither Ray nor Evelyn Torrance was seen in Nebraska again. The photographs Garrett took never made it into the official report. She kept them in a manila envelope in her desk drawer for 6 years before showing them to a journalist from the Omaha World Herald. By then, the images had faded to blank white squares, as if exposed to direct sunlight for weeks. But Garrett remembered every detail: the hooks, the drain, and the box that radiated heat without power, without fuel, without any source she could name. The lead-lined room hummed like living machinery. The state sent engineers, then physicists, Then a team from the Department of Energy wearing hazmat suits and carrying equipment Garrett didn't recognize. They worked inside the chamber for 43 minutes, removed the box on a reinforced gurney, and sealed the vault with poured concrete. When Garrett asked what they'd found, the lead investigator, a man whose badge read J. Hollis, Oak Ridge, told her the diner was being condemned for structural instability. The property would be seized under eminent domain, all records classified under national security protocols. She asked why. Hollis looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Because some things don't follow the rules we use to keep the world predictable." The Silver Spur was demolished in March of 1993. The rubble was removed in unmarked trucks. The site was paved over and left empty, a blank asphalt square on Route 47 that no developer would touch. For 2 years, nothing grew there. Not weeds, not grass, not even moss. Locals avoided it. Truckers stopped marking it on their maps. The diner that never closed became a place people forgot to remember. But the people who ate there didn't forget. They couldn't. Because 6 months after the demolition, the first hospital reports started arriving. And what those reports described made the heat and the hum seem like the least disturbing part of the story. What happened to the patrons who ate at the Silver Spur? And why did their symptoms only appear after the diner was gone? Dr. Patricia Huang held the X-ray up to the light and saw bones that glowed. Because the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Mercy General Hospital in Lincoln began tracking the pattern in August of 1993, 5 months after the Silver Spur's demolition. The first case arrived on a Tuesday. A long-haul trucker named Dennis Kowalski, 47, complaining of persistent nausea and a sunburn that wouldn't fade. He'd been to 3 doctors already. They'd prescribed aloe, hydrocortisone, antibiotics for possible infection. Nothing worked. The redness had deepened from pink to crimson, spreading across his chest and back in perfect symmetry, as if he'd been rotisseried under industrial heat lamps. Huang ordered blood work. White cell count elevated, thyroid hormones erratic. And something else. Trace elements in his plasma that the lab flagged as anomalous. Isotopes that shouldn't exist in human tissue outside of radiation therapy or nuclear accidents. She asked Kowalski about his work, his roots, his diet. He mentioned the Silver Spur, said he'd stopped there twice a week for 7 years. Best burgers on 47. He paused, then added something strange. I never got cold there. Even in January, sitting by the window, I'd be sweating. Huang made a note and sent him home with instructions to avoid direct sunlight. 3 days later, Kowalski returned to the emergency room with second-degree burns covering 60% of his body. He hadn't been outside. He'd been sitting in his living room, curtains drawn, watching television. The burns appeared over 30 minutes, blistering and peeling as if he'd fallen asleep under a desert sun. He died 4 hours later from shock and fluid loss. The attending physician listed the cause of death as acute radiation syndrome, origin unknown. By September, Mercy General had logged 14 similar cases, all of them regular patrons of the Silver Spur, all of them presenting with the same constellation of symptoms: chronic sunburn, elevated radiation markers, and a peculiar detail that appeared in every interview. They described feeling warmer after eating at the diner, as if their internal thermostat had been adjusted upward. One woman, a schoolteacher named Janet Rimmer, said she'd stopped wearing a coat that winter. Walked to her car in 15-degree weather wearing just a cardigan. Felt fine. Better than fine. Like I had a furnace inside me, she said. Huang contacted the Nebraska Department of Health. They contacted the CDC, and the CDC contacted someone else, a division Huang had never heard of, operating out of an Atlanta office with no public listing. Two men in gray suits arrived at Mercy General on October 4th and requested copies of all patient files related to the Silver Spur. They didn't introduce themselves, didn't show credentials, just handed Huang a document stating that all information regarding the cases was now under federal purview, subject to non-disclosure agreements enforced by penalties. She didn't bother reading past the first paragraph. She asked what was happening to her patients. The taller man said, "They ate contaminated food. We're handling it." Huang pressed, "Contaminated with what?" He didn't answer, but before they left, the shorter man paused in the doorway and said something that stayed with her for years. "You ever wonder why some meats stay fresh longer than others? Why they never spoil, never rot, never lose their color?" He smiled, thin, joyless. "It's because they're being preserved, just not by refrigeration." The federal agents vanished. The patient files vanished with them. Huang was reassigned to pediatrics and told to forget everything she'd seen. But she kept one record, a photocopy of Dennis Kowalski's final blood panel, hidden in her home office. Years later, she showed it to a physicist at the University of Nebraska. He studied it for 20 minutes, then asked where she'd obtained it. She told him. He handed it back and said 3 words: thermal neutron flux. A body cooked from the inside. The victims didn't know they were being irradiated. They thought they were just eating well. And by the time the symptoms appeared, Ray Torrance was gone. The diner was rubble, and the box in the basement had disappeared into federal custody. But the questions remained. What had been in that lead-lined chamber? Why did it generate heat without power? And most disturbing of all, where had the meat come from? Because the health reports only covered the patrons. No one had yet asked what happened to the people who never left the diner at all. Who were the regulars that stopped coming in 1992? And why did their families stop asking questions? The missing persons files sat in a cardboard box marked "Inactive, no leads," because some disappearances are filed away before anyone thinks to connect them. Nebraska State Police Trooper Angela Voss stumbled onto the pattern by accident in April of 1995, 2 years after the Silver Spur's demolition. She'd been reviewing cold cases for a training seminar on investigative techniques when she noticed something odd. 7 missing persons reports filed between January of 1991 and December of 1992, all originating from towns within 30 miles of mile marker 83 on Route 47. 7 people. Different ages, different backgrounds, no obvious connections, except one. Every single one had been a regular at the Silver Spur Diner. The first was Harold Penner, 63, a retired machinist from Cozad, who drove to the diner every Tuesday morning for coffee and eggs. His daughter reported him missing on January 14, 1991, after he failed to show up for her birthday dinner. His truck was found in the Silver Spur parking lot 3 days later, keys in the ignition, wallet on the dashboard, driver's door left open. No signs of struggle, no blood. The investigation lasted 6 weeks before being closed due to lack of evidence. The lead detective noted in his report, subject likely experienced medical event and wandered into nearby fields. Search efforts yielded no remains. Then came Denise Hoffman, 38, a nurse who stopped at the diner during her night shifts. Reported missing March 7, 1991. Last seen entering the Silver Spur at 11:47 p.m. by a truck driver pumping gas across the street. Her car remained in the lot for 2 days. Inside, investigators found her purse, her hospital badge, and a half-eaten roll of antacids. The detective's notes were briefer this time. No evidence of foul play. Possible voluntary departure. 5 more followed the same pattern. Different months, different circumstances, but always the same location, always the same dead end. Voss pulled the files and spread them across her desk, studying the photographs clipped to each report. Harold's lined face, Denise's hospital ID photo, a college student named Marcus Webb, no relation to the health inspector, who'd driven from Omaha to visit family and stopped for lunch. A drifter named Tom Sawicki, who'd been living out of his van and eating breakfast at the Silver Spur every morning for 3 months. 7 faces. 7 lives. 7 families who'd been told their loved ones had simply left, as if people routinely abandoned their vehicles, their belongings, and their entire existences in a diner parking lot. Voss contacted the original investigators. Most were retired. 1 had died. The few who responded told her the cases had been frustrating. Plenty of last known locations. 0 evidence of where the missing had gone afterward. One former detective, a man named Carl Brinkman, said something that made Voss write faster. We interviewed Ray Torrance 4 times. Every time, same story. Yeah, they'd been in. Yeah, they'd eaten. Yeah, they'd left. He had a way of answering questions that made you forget what you'd asked. His wife, too. Like talking to mannequins. Voss drove to the site where the Silver Spur had stood. The asphalt square was still empty, cracked now from 2 winters of freeze and thaw. She walked the perimeter, trying to imagine the diner as it had been. The chrome siding reflecting headlights, the neon sign buzzing in the dark. She thought about Harold Penner walking through those doors for the last time. Denise Hoffman sliding into a booth. Marcus Webb ordering a burger. What happened between entering and leaving? The state police database had no answers. Neither did the county records. But Voss found something else. A handwritten note tucked into Denise Hoffman's file, dated March 9th, 1991, 2 days after her disappearance. It was from a deputy who'd canvassed the area, interviewing anyone who might have seen her. He'd spoken to a farmer named Eugene Durst, whose property bordered Route 47 half a mile south of the diner. Durst told the deputy he'd heard a woman screaming around midnight on March 7th. Not words, just a sound, like someone being dragged. The deputy had driven out to investigate, found nothing, and noted, subject likely heard animal distress call or misidentified sound from highway traffic. Voss called Eugene Durst. He was 81 now, living in a nursing home in Grand Island. His memory was sharp. He remembered the scream, and he remembered something else. I seen lights that night, not headlights, different. Coming from behind the diner down where the old service road used to run. Bright white lights, low to the ground, moving slow. I figured it was Ray hauling trash or supplies, but it was past midnight, and I never seen him work that late before. Voss asked what kind of lights. Durst paused. The kind you use when you don't want anyone to see what you're carrying. She requested access to the Silver Spur property records. The request was denied. Federal jurisdiction, she was told. Classified site. When she pushed harder, her sergeant pulled her into his office and suggested, politely but firmly, that she focus on active cases. The missing persons from 91 and 92 were cold. The diner was gone. Ray Torrance hadn't been seen in 2 years. Let it go. But Voss couldn't let it go. Because she'd found one more detail buried in the files, a detail no one had thought to pursue. The health inspector who'd first reported the vault, Marcus Webb, had a nephew. Same name, same love of roadside diners. And that nephew had vanished from the Silver Spur parking lot on October 3rd, 1991, 7 months after Webb's basement inspection. What if the disappearances weren't random? What if Ray Torrance had been selecting his victims? Ray Torrance bought the Silver Spur with cash in 1961, and no one knew where the money came from. Because the best way to hide a secret is to serve it on a plate. Trooper Angela Voss spent 3 months chasing paper trails that led nowhere. Ray's business licenses were in order. His tax returns showed modest but consistent profit. His suppliers, a meat distributor in Kearney, a produce company in Lincoln, confirmed regular deliveries, nothing unusual. But when Voss dug deeper, she found gaps. The meat orders were too small. A diner serving 40 to 60 customers daily, open 24 hours, should have been ordering 3 to 4 times what Ray's invoices showed. She called the distributor and spoke to a warehouse manager who'd worked there since 1978. "Ray Torrance," the manager said, voice uncertain. "Yeah, I remember him. Weird thing was, he barely ordered from us. Maybe once a month. We figured he had another supplier, someone local. But he kept his account, active, kept paying, so we didn't ask questions." Voss pressed. "What did he order when he did call?" "Mostly chicken, sometimes pork, never beef. Not once in 15 years did that man order a single pound of ground beef. But the Silver Spur was famous for its burgers." Voss pulled records from the county health department. Every inspection report filed on the diner between 1961 and 1993. 17 inspections. Every single one passed with perfect marks. Fresh meat stored at proper temperatures. No cross-contamination. Equipment maintained to code. But Marcus Webb's report from January of '93 was missing. Voss requested a copy from state archives. The request came back stamped. "Document removed per federal directive. USC Title 50, Section 1812. National Security Statutes. The same classification used for nuclear materials." She shifted focus to Ray Torrance himself. Birth certificate. Mitchell County, Iowa, 1927. Military service, U.S. Army, enlisted 1945. Discharged 1948. Occupation listed as Quartermaster Corps, Logistics and Supply. Voss contacted the National Archives to request his service records. 3 weeks later, she received a letter stating that Ray Torrance's military file had been destroyed in the 1973 fire at the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. The same fire that consumed 16 to 18 million records. One of the largest archival disasters in American history. Convenient. Too convenient. Voss found a photograph of Ray from 1962, clipped from a local newspaper article celebrating the diner's first anniversary. He stood in front of the grill, spatula in hand, unsmiling. Even in grainy newsprint, his eyes looked flat, distant, like a man watching something no one else could see. The caption read, "Ray Torrance, bringing a taste of home to Route 47. A taste of home from where?" She tracked down former employees. Most had worked briefly, a few weeks, maybe 2 months, before quitting without explanation. One woman, Sandra Cho, had waitressed at the Silver Spur for 6 weeks in 1987. She agreed to meet Voss at a coffee shop in Hastings. Sandra was 49 now, worked as a dental hygienist, and hadn't thought about the diner in years. But when Voss mentioned Ray Torrance, Sandra's expression changed. "He never let anyone into the basement," she said. "Not me, not the other waitresses, not even Evelyn sometimes. He kept it locked, and he kept the keys on him at all times. But I went down there once by accident. I was looking for extra napkins. Thought maybe he stored supplies down there. I tried the door, and it was unlocked. Only time I ever saw it that way. I opened it, started down the stairs, and the smell hit me. Voss leaned forward. What kind of smell? Sandra hesitated. You ever drive past a rendering plant? That thick, sweet, rot smell? Like that, but worse. And the heat. It was July, but that basement felt like an oven. I got halfway down and Ray appeared at the top of the stairs. Didn't say a word, just stood there. I came back up, and he locked the door behind me. I quit the next day. Didn't even ask for my last paycheck. Voss asked if she'd told anyone. Who was I going to tell? Ray Torrance ran the best diner in 3 counties. People loved that place, and I was just some college kid passing through. Who'd believe me? That was the pattern Voss kept finding. People who'd seen something, felt something, but stayed quiet because the alternative was calling the whole town delusional. The Silver Spur had been an institution. Ray had been a fixture. And when your livelihood depends on a steady stream of customers, you don't ask why the meat tastes so good or why the basement door stays locked. What would you do if everyone around you insisted everything was fine, even when your instincts screamed otherwise? Voss found one final lead, a utility company invoice from November of 1992, 4 months before the flood. The Silver Spur's electricity bill had been $37. For a 24-hour diner with multiple refrigerators, freezers, grills, and lights, that was impossibly low. A residential home used more power. She called the utility company. They confirmed the reading. She asked if there had been a mistake, a missed meter reading. The representative checked and said no. The diner had been pulling minimal power for years. When Voss asked how a commercial kitchen could operate on so little electricity, the representative paused. Ma'am, I don't know, but whatever was keeping those grills hot, it wasn't coming from us. So where was the heat coming from? And what had Ray Torrance brought back from his time in the Quartermaster Corps that hummed like bees and cooked meat without fire? The Department of Energy denied the box had ever been recovered, but the transport logs told a different story. Because governments don't classify things that don't exist. Trooper Angela Voss hit a wall in July of 1995 when every federal agency she contacted stonewalled her inquiries. The DOE claimed no knowledge of operations at the Silver Spur site. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission had no records. The Department of Defense referred her back to the DOE. She was being shuffled in circles, and she knew it. But Voss had spent 6 years working highway patrol before transferring to investigations, and she'd learned one crucial lesson. Every convoy leaves a trail. She started with the fire marshal's report from February 19, 1993, the day the vault was opened. Linda Garrett had documented the federal team's arrival, but hadn't recorded their departure. Voss called Garrett, now retired and living in Scottsbluff. Garrett remembered the convoy leaving around 9 p.m., 3 black Suburbans and a panel truck with no markings. She'd watched from the parking lot as they loaded the box onto a reinforced gurney, covered it with a silver thermal blanket, and secured it inside the truck with ratchet straps. I asked where they were taking it, Garrett said. The lead guy, Hollis, told me it was going to Oak Ridge for analysis. But Angela, I've seen Oak Ridge transports before. They use DOE vehicles, marked and registered. These were ghost trucks. No plates, no dot numbers, nothing. Voss pulled traffic camera footage from Route 47. Nebraska's highway system in '93 was sparse, but the state had installed cameras at 3 major intersections within 50 miles of the diner. She filed requests under the Freedom of Information Act. 2 came back empty. Footage from that date range had been recorded over. But the 3rd camera, positioned at the junction of 47 and Highway 83, had captured something. 4 vehicles heading south at 9:17 p.m. on February 19th. The timestamp matched. The images were grainy, low resolution, but Voss could make out the panel truck, the Suburbans in formation. She zoomed in on the truck's rear door. No identifying marks, but something else caught her eye. A placard, barely visible, the kind used to denote hazardous materials. She enhanced the image as much as the technology allowed. The placard showed a trefoil symbol, radioactive materials. Voss contacted a friend at the University of Nebraska's physics department, a researcher named Dr. Aaron Licht, who specialized in nuclear history. She showed him the photos from Garrett's Polaroids, the ones that had faded to white, and described the box, the heat, the hum, the lead-lined chamber. Licht listened without interrupting, then asked a question that made Voss's pen stop moving. "How big did you say the box was?" She checked her notes. Roughly 4 feet long, 3 feet wide, 2 feet deep. Licht nodded slowly. "That's about the size of a radioisotope thermoelectric generator, an RTG. They're used in space probes, remote military installations, anywhere you need long-term power without refueling. They generate heat through radioactive decay, usually plutonium-238. The heat is constant, predictable, and lasts for decades." Voss asked if they were dangerous. Contained? No. But if the shielding is compromised, or if you're exposed to one for extended periods without protection, you're looking at chronic radiation poisoning. Exactly what you described happening to those diner patrons. She pressed further. Could an RTG generate enough heat to cook food? Licht's expression darkened. Absolutely. In fact, Soviet scientists during the Cold War experimented with using RTGs for industrial heating. But the program was abandoned because the radiation exposure was too high. You'd be poisoning anyone who ate the food. He paused. Where would someone like Ray Torrance even get access to an RTG? That was the question Voss couldn't answer. RTGs were tightly controlled, manufactured by a handful of government contractors, and tracked from production to disposal. But she found a lead in the most unlikely place. A declassified military memo from 1947, obtained through a FOIA request she'd filed months earlier on a hunch. The memo, authored by a Quartermaster Corps colonel, detailed an inventory discrepancy at a storage facility in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. 3 experimental heating units, designated SNAP-1 prototypes, had gone missing during a facility transfer in October of 1947. SNAP, Systems for Nuclear Auxiliary Power, was the precursor to modern RTGs. The memo noted that a full investigation had been launched, but the document ended there. No follow-up, no resolution. Voss cross-referenced the dates. Ray Torrance had been discharged from the Quartermaster Corps in 1948, 6 months after the Oak Ridge theft. His service record, conveniently destroyed, would have shown his posting locations. She'd bet her pension he'd been at Oak Ridge. But even if Ray had stolen an RTG in '47, that didn't explain the hooks in the chamber, the drain, the missing people. An RTG could generate heat, yes, but it couldn't make people disappear. Unless Ray had been using it for something beyond cooking burgers. Unless the heat was just the first layer of what he'd built in that basement. Voss obtained blueprints of the Silver Spur from county records, filed in 1961 when Ray purchased the property. The blueprints showed a standard commercial kitchen, dining area, restrooms, and a basement marked as storage. But when she compared them to the dimensions Linda Garrett had described, the numbers didn't match. The vault chamber was 12 feet square. The blueprints showed the basement as 8 feet by 10. 4 feet of space unaccounted for. A hidden room, or a shaft leading deeper. Voss drove to the site one final time. The asphalt was cracked worse now, weeds forcing through in jagged lines. She walked to the center, where the diner's kitchen would have stood, and crouched down. The ground felt warm beneath her hand, even in late autumn. She pressed her ear to the pavement and heard it, faint, distant, almost subliminal. A hum, still there, still alive. The box had been removed, the vault had been sealed, but something remained beneath Route 47, something the federal government couldn't extract or didn't want to. What had Ray Torrance really built in that basement? And where was he now? Ray Torrance walked into a police station in Baja California on November 3, 2001, and confessed to 32 murders. Because some men carry their guilt until the weight becomes unbearable. The confession came 8 years after the Silver Spur's demolition, delivered to a Mexican federal police comandante named Hector Ruiz in the coastal town of Ensenada. Ruiz later described Ray as a man who looked like he'd been hollowed out. 74 years old, gaunt, skin like parchment, eyes sunken so deep they seemed to have retreated from the world. Ray walked into the station at dawn. No identification, no belongings except the clothes he wore. He sat down across from Ruiz and said in perfect Spanish, "I need to tell you what I did in Nebraska." Ruiz contacted the FBI. The Bureau contacted Nebraska State Police, and Trooper Angela Voss received a phone call that validated 3 years of dead ends and closed doors. Ray Torrance was extradited in January of 2002. He waived his right to an attorney, refused a plea deal, and spent 11 hours across 2 days detailing what had happened beneath the Silver Spur Diner. His confession was recorded, transcribed, and immediately classified. Voss obtained a redacted copy through legal channels, though entire sections were blacked out. What remained was horrifying enough. Ray admitted to stealing a Snap 1 prototype from Oak Ridge in October of 1947 while serving as a supply sergeant. He'd falsified transfer documents, loaded the unit into a civilian truck, and buried it in a storage locker in Iowa until his discharge. He described the device as a gift and a curse. It generated endless heat, required no fuel, and would outlive him by centuries. When he bought the Silver Spur in '61, he built the vault specifically to house it, lining the walls with lead sheeting he'd purchased through scrap dealers across 3 states. The heat allowed him to cook without electricity, to keep meat preserved indefinitely, to run a diner that never closed because the grill never cooled. But the radiation leaked. Not enough to kill quickly. Just enough to cook his customers from the inside over months and years of exposure. Ray claimed he didn't know at first. By the time he understood what was happening, around 1986, when a regular patron named Doris Klemp died of what doctors called inexplicable thermal trauma, he'd already poisoned hundreds. He could have shut down, could have sealed the vault and walked away. Instead, he kept cooking. Voss read that section twice, trying to understand the psychology of a man who'd knowingly served contaminated food for 7 more years. Ray's explanation was chilling in its simplicity. People loved the diner. They needed it. And I needed them to need it. But the radiation victims weren't the 32 murders Ray confessed to. Those were the ones who discovered the truth. Ray described a pattern that began in 1991. Harold Penner, the retired machinist, had noticed his hands glowing faintly in the dark after washing dishes at home. He came back to the diner, suspicious, asking questions about the basement. Ray invited him down to see for himself. Harold descended the stairs and never came back up. Ray had struck him with a pipe wrench, dragged the body to the vault, and hung it on one of the hooks to process. The RTG's heat desiccated flesh, turned bodies into husks. Within 2 weeks, Harold Penner weighed 38 pounds and crumbled when touched. Ray repeated the process 31 more times between January of '91 and December of '92. Denise Hoffman, Marcus Webb, Tom Sawicki. Anyone who asked too many questions, anyone who threatened to call authorities, anyone who connected their symptoms to the diner. Ray lured them to the basement, killed them, and hung them in the vault until they dried to ash. Then he swept the remains into the drain and let the water carry them into the septic system. The hooks weren't for meat storage. They were for corpses. Voss felt sick reading the transcript, but one detail haunted her more than the murders themselves. Ray's description of what happened in the vault during those 2 weeks of processing. He claimed the bodies moved, not reflexive muscle spasms, deliberate movement, twisting on the hooks, reaching toward the RTG as if drawn to its radiation. He described hearing voices in the hum, whispers that sounded like the dead trying to speak. The DOE psychologist who interviewed Ray noted in the margin, "Subject exhibits delusional thinking consistent with prolonged radiation exposure, possible neurological damage." But Fire Marshal Linda Garrett had heard the hum. So had Marcus Webb. So had Voss herself, pressing her ear to the asphalt. If Ray's brain had been damaged by radiation, what about everyone else who'd heard the same sound? Ray's confession concluded with a statement that was redacted in full, 11 lines blacked out, followed by a note from the transcriber. Subject became agitated and incoherent. Interview terminated at 14:23 hours. Voss filed a motion to have the redaction lifted. Denied. She appealed. Denied again. She contacted Ray's public defender, hoping for insight. The lawyer said Ray had refused to repeat whatever he'd said in those final minutes. When pressed, Ray would only shake his head and whisper, "It's still down there. It's still waiting." Ray Torrance died in custody on March 17, 2002, 3 months before his trial could begin. The coroner listed the cause as acute leukemia, consistent with long-term radiation exposure. His body was cremated per federal order, the ashes disposed of in an undisclosed location. No funeral, no marker, no record except the classified confession. The Silver Spur case was officially closed. The missing persons were declared victims of homicide, their families notified. Angela Voss was commended for her investigative work and quietly reassigned to Highway Patrol. She never worked another cold case. But in 2007, a construction crew breaking ground for a rest stop near mile marker 83 reported equipment malfunctions. Generators overheating, drill bits melting, workers complaining of nausea and burns. The site was abandoned after 3 days. And in 2012, a long haul. Trucker posted on a forum about a strange warm spot on Route 47, a patch of asphalt where snow never accumulated, even in February. The cold room under the diner was never cold at all. Some say if you park at mile marker 83 and press your hand to the pavement at night, you can still feel the hum. And if you listen closely, you'll hear voices rising from beneath the earth. 32 whispers, begging to be found. We're only scratching the surface. The next case is even darker. Subscribe before it drops.